Today I want to take a few minutes and talk about three particular topics. The first is financial aid, the second would be purchasing, and the third would be cash flow management. In today's Catholic school settings, a critical element to any budget is financial aid. Parents are no longer able to afford, in many cases, the full tuition. Higher education has dealt with this for years. And as a result, schools have increased the amount of financial aid awarded to particular families. Now, if you're Harvard University or Yale or the University of Michigan, you have perhaps $1 billion or more sitting in an endowment fund. For most of us, we do not have that luxury. In some cases, schools are getting by year to year and struggling simply to do that. So, do you have a financial aid policy? It's important that you tell people that financial aid is available. So often, schools assume that parents know these things. The reality is they don't. Many parents are concerned that they can't pay the full tuition, therefore I really guess I can't and won't apply. The reality is that by awarding, even in some cases, a small amount, it is enough to make a difference between a parent sending their child to a private Catholic school or sending them to the public schools. In all of your print materials regarding your school, please make sure that you spell out that financial aid is available. Now, many schools use outside firms to help determine the amount that is awarded to a particular family. Those companies look at all the data and say this family can pay X number of dollars towards their tuition at your school. But just because they say that, it does not mean that the family is guaranteed of that. Because in some cases, if you took all of that money that the outside company says you should be spending, you don't have enough money to pay for it. And the reality is, in budgets, you must account for financial aid money. Many people think that, well, if we give them a discount, we just don't put it on the books. That's not right. From an accounting standpoint, you must account for all tuition reductions. That means that if your faculty gets a discount, that must be incorporated into your budget. Don't simply assume that you can just pretend that the money isn't there. Why? Because every student in your building, every student, has a tuition value. If that's $3,000, $4,000, $9,000, $10,000, whatever the amount would be. If you're awarding $1,000 in financial aid, it needs to be reflected in your budget. So as you look at your budget, you need to determine how much you are able and willing to spend on financial aid. In many schools, outside funds are used for that. Perhaps a school has an endowment. In many cases, schools look to alumni to help offset the cost of the current tuition for students through an annual campaign, perhaps. But you need to make sure that it's clear in your budget how much you're giving to families in your school, and if you're giving a discount to your faculty. Some schools do, some don't. It really is up to the individual school and what you have decided. Now, the second topic I want to talk about is purchasing. Purchasing is a very complicated issue for some people because of the fact that they don't really want to tell somebody that they can't spend a particular amount of money. You need to make sure that you have a purchasing policy. The same way that you would have a financial aid policy, make sure that your purchasing policy is clearly spelled out. How and when can people purchase things? Some schools have a policy that in the last quarter of the school year, purchases cannot be made over X number of dollars. Why? Well, in some cases, people hold on to their budget and think that, well, I have this at the end of the year, I'll go ahead and spend it. That concept is totally wrong. The money that you've allocated in the budget for a particular area, for a particular year, should be spent that year, not waiting until the end of the year to see what else I can buy. That's kind of the government rule. The government, in so many cases, they will hold off until almost the end of the budget year, and then in September there's a feeding frenzy, and if you look at companies that sell things to the federal government, a lot of purchases are made in September. Why? Because people have kind of hoarded the money until then and allowed it to be used to purchase things at the end of the year. In our schools, that really is counterproductive. The money is to be spent during the course of the year for the benefit of the students and the faculty that are there, not waiting until next year. My personal policy is if you have not spent it, then it goes into the general funds. That encourages people to use the money for the purpose in which it was intended. But you also need to make sure that you have the documentation. In one particular school that I worked with several years ago, their purchasing policy was light, to say the least. You simply came in, presented the business manager with the bill for something that you purchased, and you'd simply get reimbursed. That's not the way it's supposed to happen. There should be an authorization process clearly spelled out. The process should include the business manager, and in some cases the principal, if it's over a certain amount of money. Now, in my particular case, when I was running the school, I had a policy that anything over $500 required the signature of the head of the school. Why? That ensured that we were not spending large amounts of money without understanding clearly what we would be using that money for. So, when you're looking at a policy booklet, make sure that you consider financial aid, compensation, and purchasing. Now, the last topic I want to talk about today is cash flow management. Now, this is a tough topic for some people because they look at their budget and say, well, we have X number of dollars, we'll just spend it. But do you have the money in the bank? You have to consider it the same way you would your household. If you need to purchase a new suit or a new dress, would you simply just go out and buy it and say, well, if I spend $500 on it, that's okay. I'll figure it out later where I'm going to get the money. So you simply put it on a credit card. Then at the end of the day, that credit card comes due. And will you have enough money to ensure that you can pay for it? Now, when you're looking at cash flow management, as the head of the school, you should be analyzing the financial information on at least a monthly basis. Looking at the income that's being generated. How much tuition money is coming in? It's great to assume that everyone is paying their tuition on time and you're getting your money. The reality is that doesn't happen. There's a line item in most budgets that says bad debt. That means people decide to leave the school halfway through the year and they haven't paid the tuition. you're still on the hook for paying all your bills, even if that individual does not pay their tuition. Many Catholic schools in particular have been burned by this over the years. So you need to make sure that you analyze the trends. If you lose students at semester each year, are you factoring that into your budget? What do you anticipate the student dropout rate at the end of the first semester to be? Have you looked at the data over the last few years to see if there's a trend? But when you look at your cash flow, you also need to look at the other income streams that you have. What fundraising activities do you have? Many schools wait until April or March to have their big fundraisers. The reality is, why? Why not have it earlier in the year when you can spend that money to help the students that year? If you're looking at having an auction or gala or some big event in late March or April every year, the reality is that money probably will not be spent that year. Why? Because by the time you order something, it will be probably at least another month before you get it, and then suddenly it's May, and you're starting to look at the following year and closing out this year, not starting new programs. But you also need to make sure that in your cash flow analysis, that you look at possible large expenditures, look at your revenue and your expenses, especially during the cold winter months. This year, it's been, in many areas in the United States, very cold and very snowy. Well, that means heat bills go up. That means that you have to pay more for salt, for plowing of parking lots and sidewalks. The reality is, do you have the money to cover those expenses? When you start to build your budget, I would encourage you to also do a cash flow analysis for each month during the course of that year. What do you anticipate spending in September? Many schools purchase a great deal of materials in August and September, and that's fine. But make sure that you have the cash flow to support that. If not, how will you be paying for it? Because the bills will come due. You can only hold people off for so long before they take you to court, and rightfully so. So, as you look at budgets, the important things to consider when you're looking at financial aid, you're looking at purchasing, and you're looking at cash flow analysis. Look at the data, all of the data, and also make sure that you have clearly spelled out the policies in each one of those areas. If you do those things, budgeting for a particular year will be much less stressful and much more productive. I hope these thoughts have helped. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Again, I appreciate it, and have a good day.